Whose car did you steal? The question cut through the warm Saturday afternoon like a blade of ice. And for a moment, every conversation in the parking lot seemed to stop. Ava Johnson froze beside the black Rolls-Royce Cullinan, the sunlight gliding across its polished paint like liquid glass. At 19 years old, she stood barely 5 feet 6 inches tall, wearing a faded gray hoodie, white sneakers, and jeans that looked more practical than fashionable. Nothing about her appearance matched the six-figure luxury SUV parked beside her. Maybe that was why dozens of eyes immediately believed the accusation before hearing a single word from her. Red and blue lights flashed across the chrome grille. Reflections danced across the storefront windows of the upscale shopping center. Shoppers slowed their pace. Some stopped completely. Others quietly reached for their phones. Officer Ryan Mitchell stepped forward with the confidence of a man who believed he already knew the answer. His expression carried the certainty that often came before mistakes. "Step away from the vehicle," he said firmly. Ava blinked once. "Officer, this is my car." A few people nearby exchanged looks. Someone laughed softly. Another person shook their head as if the situation was obvious. Ryan glanced at the Rolls-Royce and then back at Ava. The disbelief on his face wasn't subtle. The vehicle gleamed beneath the Georgia sun, its black paint reflecting the clouds drifting overhead. It looked like something owned by a celebrity, a CEO, or a professional athlete, not a college freshman standing alone with a backpack slung over one shoulder. "Do you have any idea how suspicious this looks?" Ryan asked. Ava swallowed. Her heart was beginning to pound, but she kept her voice calm. "I have the keys. I have the registration. I can show you everything." The officer didn't move. Around them, the crowd grew larger. The low hum of traffic mixed with the sound of distant music from a nearby restaurant patio. Phones continued to rise into the air. Tiny cameras pointed toward Ava from every direction. She could feel them watching, judging, deciding. A middle-aged woman standing near a luxury boutique folded her arms and frowned. "There's no way that's her vehicle," she muttered loudly enough for others to hear. Several heads nodded. Ava heard every word. She felt each one land. Yet she refused to lower her eyes. The Rolls-Royce key fob rested securely in her hand. The registration sat inside her purse. The truth was within reach. But somehow the truth already seemed less powerful than the assumptions filling the parking lot. Ryan stepped closer and looked at the SUV once more. His jaw tightened. "We're going to sort this out," he said. "Until then, nobody is going anywhere." Ava looked at the growing circle of strangers surrounding her. The afternoon heat suddenly felt heavier. The flashing lights seemed brighter. Across the parking lot, a little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed toward the scene. More phones appeared. More whispers spread. More eyes settled on Ava Johnson. And standing there beneath the endless Georgia sky, surrounded by people who had already written the story in their minds, she realized this was no longer about a car. Ava Johnson had learned a long time ago that appearances could tell people whatever story they wanted to believe. As the crowd continued gathering around the parking lot, she found herself thinking about her mother. 3 years earlier, Monica Johnson had been driving an aging delivery van across Atlanta, making client visits herself because she could not afford to hire enough drivers. Most people never saw the sleepless nights, the rejected contracts, or the stacks of unpaid invoices spread across the kitchen table. They only saw success after it arrived. The afternoon sun reflected off the storefront windows as Ava stood quietly beside the luxury SUV. Her fingers tightened around the key fob resting in her palm. The vehicle had not appeared in her life by accident. It represented years of sacrifice she had witnessed firsthand. Every early morning, every missed vacation, every promise her mother made to herself that one day things would be different. A year ago, Monica's logistics company secured a nationwide distribution contract. 6 months later, the business expanded into 3 states. Revenue grew faster than anyone expected. Then, on Ava's 19th birthday, her mother handed her a small black box across the dining room table. Inside was the key fob. Ava still remembered staring at it in disbelief. "You earned this," Monica had said. "Not because it is expensive, because you never forgot who you were while everything around us changed." The memory felt distant now. The reality in front of her was very different. Nearby, Officer Ryan Mitchell spoke into his radio while occasionally glancing in her direction. The flashing lights continued washing over the parking lot in rhythmic bursts of blue and red. People whispered. Some pointed. Others watched with open curiosity. None of them knew that Ava attended college on an academic scholarship despite her family's wealth. None of them knew she still preferred thrift store hoodies over designer brands. None of them knew she volunteered at a youth mentorship program every Saturday morning before running errands. To them, she was simply a young black woman standing beside a vehicle that did not fit their expectations. Ava slowly reached into her purse. "The registration is right here," she said calmly. "The insurance card, too." Ryan looked at the documents, but did not immediately take them. His hesitation seemed to strengthen the crowd's assumptions. A few feet away, a man wearing sunglasses quietly shook his head. Another person whispered something that caused a small group to laugh. Ava heard the sound. She chose not to react. Her mother often said that dignity was most important when other people try to take it from you. The warm Georgia breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee from a nearby cafe. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn sounded. Life continued around the scene as though nothing unusual was happening. Yet Ava could feel the weight of every stare pressing against her shoulders. Then her phone vibrated inside her purse. Once, twice, 3 times. She glanced at the screen. The caller ID displayed a single name. Mom. Ava's heartbeat slowed slightly. For the first time since the flashing lights appeared behind her, she felt a small sense of relief. Because if there was one person capable of changing the direction of this afternoon, it was Monica Johnson. The moment Ava saw her mother's name glowing on the screen, she answered without hesitation. "Mom." Her voice remained steady, but Monica Johnson immediately sensed something was wrong. "Ava, why do I hear sirens?" she asked. The question hung in the air. Around them, the crowd continued to grow. The flashing lights reflected across the dark windows of the Rolls-Royce. Ava looked toward Officer Ryan Mitchell. He was speaking quietly with another officer who had just arrived. Neither seemed interested in the documents still resting in Ava's hand. "There has been a misunderstanding," Ava said carefully. Monica fell silent for a second. Then another. "Put me on speaker." Ava obeyed. The sound of the busy parking lot filled the call. Voices. Footsteps. Distant traffic. A child laughing somewhere near the entrance of a department store. Monica's voice emerged calm and controlled. "This is Monica Johnson. I am the registered owner of Johnson Freight Solutions. That vehicle belongs to my daughter." Several people nearby exchanged surprised looks. Officer Ryan stepped closer. "Ma'am, we are conducting an investigation." Monica did not raise her voice. She did not sound angry. Somehow that made her words even stronger. "Then I suggest you verify the registration information my daughter is attempting to provide." Ryan extended his hand at last. Ava gave him the documents. He studied them briefly before passing them to the second officer. The crowd watched every movement. Phones remained pointed toward the scene. What had started as curiosity was beginning to shift into uncertainty. The second officer examined the paperwork more carefully. His eyes moved from the registration to the insurance card and back again. A faint crease formed on his forehead. Meanwhile, Monica continued speaking through the phone. "Officer, I purchased that vehicle 8 months ago through Sterling Luxury Motors in Atlanta. Ownership was transferred to Ava on her birthday. Every document should confirm that." Ryan glanced toward the Rolls-Royce. The confidence that had defined his posture earlier seemed slightly diminished. Not gone, just challenged. Nearby, the woman who had questioned whether the vehicle belonged to Ava folded her arms tighter, but said nothing. For the first time, the certainty in the crowd appeared to crack. The second officer stepped aside and spoke quietly into his radio. A few moments later, another transmission came back. The officer's expression changed. Ava noticed it immediately. He looked at the registration again, then at her, then back at the vehicle. The afternoon sun drifted lower across the sky, bathing the parking lot in a softer golden light. The tension remained, but something underneath it had shifted. Ryan's jaw tightened. He asked for Ava's driver's license. She handed it over without argument. Every request, every question, every document. She answered with patience. Monica remained connected through the phone the entire time. "Ava," she said softly, "remember who you are." Ava closed her eyes briefly. The words carried her back to childhood, to late nights at the kitchen table, to lessons about integrity, dignity, and self-respect. When she opened her eyes again, she stood a little taller. Then the second officer lowered his radio and looked directly at Ryan. Neither man spoke for several seconds. But the silence alone was enough to tell Ava that the story everyone thought they understood was beginning to fall apart. Officer Ryan Mitchell stared at the paperwork for what felt like an unusually long time. The confidence that had fueled the entire encounter was slowly being replaced by something less comfortable. Doubt. The second officer shifted his weight and handed the documents back without saying a word. The movement was small, but everyone noticed it. The crowd that had been eager to witness a dramatic confrontation now stood in uneasy silence. Several people lowered their phones. Others exchanged uncertain glances. The afternoon had changed direction. Monica Johnson remained on speakerphone. Her voice carried clearly through the warm air. "Officer, has the registration been verified?" Ryan hesitated. "We are still reviewing everything." Monica did not argue. She simply responded, "The records will tell you exactly what I already told you." Ava stood quietly beside the Rolls-Royce. She could feel dozens of eyes still fixed on her, but the energy was different now. Earlier, people had looked at her with suspicion. Now they seemed unsure what to think. The woman who had questioned whether the vehicle could belong to Ava suddenly became interested in checking messages on her phone. A young man who had been recording from the front of the crowd slowly stepped back. Nobody seemed eager to repeat their earlier assumptions. A notification sounded from one of the officers' radios. Then another. The second officer listened carefully. His expression tightened. "Dispatch confirmed ownership records," he said at last. The words landed heavily in the silence. Ava felt her chest rise with a slow breath. Around her, conversations immediately began in hushed whispers. The luxury vehicle was registered exactly as she had claimed. The insurance records matched. The title transfer had been completed months earlier. Everything checked out. Every document. Every database. Every detail. Ryan looked toward Ava. For the first time since arriving, he seemed to truly see her rather than the story he had imagined. But the moment did not erase what had already happened. More than 50 people had watched the situation unfold. Many had recorded it. Some videos were probably already spreading online. The assumptions had traveled faster than the facts. Monica spoke again. "Ava, are you all right?" "Yes, Mom," Ava answered softly. "I am okay." The words were simple, but her throat felt tight as she said them. She was not angry. She was not afraid. Mostly, she felt exhausted. Exhausted by having to prove something that should never have required proof in the first place. The golden afternoon sunlight reflected across the polished hood of the Rolls-Royce. The vehicle sat exactly where it had been all along. Silent. Unchanged. It had never needed defending. Only its owner had. A black SUV suddenly turned into the parking lot and approached from the far entrance. Ava recognized it immediately. Her mother's vehicle. Monica stepped out moments later wearing a navy business suit and low heels. She walked with calm purpose across the pavement. No dramatic gestures. No raised voice. Just confidence earned through years of overcoming obstacles most people never saw. The crowd parted instinctively as she approached her daughter. Monica looked at Ava first. Not the officers. Not the vehicle. Her daughter. Then she gently placed a hand on Ava's shoulder. "I am here," she said. Ava smiled faintly. For the first time that afternoon, she felt completely steady. But as Monica turned her attention toward the officers, the expression in her eyes suggested that this story was far from over. Monica Johnson's gaze settled on Officer Ryan Mitchell, and the parking lot seemed to grow quieter with every passing second. She did not look angry. She looked disappointed. Somehow that felt heavier. The afternoon sun hung low above the shopping center, casting long shadows across the pavement. The flashing lights that had commanded so much attention earlier now felt strangely out of place. "My daughter provided her documents from the beginning," Monica said calmly. The registration matched. The insurance matched. The ownership records matched. Yet somehow she still had to stand here and defend herself. Ryan opened his mouth as if searching for the right response, but none seemed to arrive. Around them, people continued watching. Several phones remained raised. Others had already begun replaying recordings on their screens. The story that had started with certainty was unraveling in front of everyone. Ava remained beside her mother, saying very little. She could feel the exhaustion settling into her shoulders. The attention, the questions, the assumptions. None of it had lasted more than an hour, yet it felt much longer. Monica glanced around at the crowd. "Do you know what is interesting?" She asked quietly. Nobody answered. Not one person asked who she was before deciding what she could not possibly own. The words drifted through the warm air. A few people lowered their eyes. Others shifted uncomfortably. The woman who had spoken earlier about the vehicle suddenly looked eager to leave. She turned away and disappeared into the shopping center without another word. Monica was not interested in humiliating anyone. That was obvious. She simply wanted people to sit with the truth. Sometimes truth was uncomfortable. A notification sounded from Ava's phone. Then another. Then several more. She looked down. Social media alerts were appearing faster than she could read them. Someone had already uploaded part of the encounter online. Thousands of views were accumulating by the minute. Comments poured in from strangers across the country. Some expressed outrage. Others questioned how such assumptions could happen so quickly. Ava felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The situation was no longer confined to a parking lot. It was spreading. The second officer noticed the notifications as well. He quietly exchanged a glance with Ryan. The reality of public scrutiny was becoming impossible to ignore. Monica folded her arms. "This should never have happened," she said. Ryan finally spoke. "Ma'am, we responded to a report and followed procedure." Monica nodded once. "Then procedure deserves a closer look." The statement was not loud. It was not dramatic. Yet it landed with surprising force. Ava looked toward the rows of storefront windows reflecting the golden evening light. Earlier, she had felt small beneath the attention of the crowd. Now she felt something different. Not victory. Not satisfaction. Clarity. She understood that the issue had never been the vehicle. It had been perception. The Rolls-Royce remained parked exactly where it had been all afternoon, silent beneath the fading sunlight. Yet somehow that vehicle had become a mirror, reflecting assumptions people did not realize they carried. As the first news notification appeared on a local reporter's social media feed, Ava realized the day was entering a new chapter. The misunderstanding might be over, but the consequences were only beginning. That evening, the world felt strangely quiet. The noise of the parking lot, the flashing lights, the whispers, and the endless attention had all faded into memory, but their weight remained. Ava sat alone on the back porch of her mother's house as dusk settled across the neighborhood. The sky above Atlanta glowed in layers of gold, orange, and deep blue. Crickets chirped somewhere beyond the fence. A gentle breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Her phone rested face down beside her. She had stopped checking it hours ago. The notifications had become impossible to count. Videos, messages, news articles, opinions from strangers who knew nothing about her life. Some supported her. Others debated her existence as though she were a headline instead of a person. Ava leaned back and looked toward the fading horizon. For a long moment, she simply listened to the evening. Inside the house, she could hear dishes being put away. A television murmured softly from another room. The ordinary sounds felt comforting, real, human. Monica stepped onto the porch carrying 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to her daughter before taking the seat beside her. Neither spoke immediately. The warm ceramic felt comforting against Ava's hands. Steam curled upward into the cooling air. Finally, Monica broke the silence. "Do you remember the old delivery van?" Ava smiled faintly. "The one that barely started in winter?" Monica laughed softly. "That one." They sat together remembering. The broken air conditioner. The peeling paint. The countless miles. The years when success seemed impossibly far away. Back then, nobody questioned whether they belonged anywhere because nobody paid attention. Now attention seemed to follow them everywhere. Ava stared into her tea. "I keep thinking about how quickly everyone decided who I was." Monica nodded slowly. "People often see what they expect to see." The answer carried no bitterness, only experience. A streetlight flickered on across the road. The first stars appeared overhead. Ava thought about the crowd, the comments, the assumptions. She thought about how calmly her mother had stood in the middle of it all, not demanding respect, simply refusing to surrender her dignity. "Were you scared?" Ava asked quietly. Monica considered the question. "For you?" "Yes." She smiled gently. "But not because I doubted the truth." The words settled warmly into Ava's chest. The truth. Simple. Unchanging. It had existed before the accusations and remained afterward. The problem was never whether truth existed. The problem was whether people cared enough to find it. Ava's phone suddenly lit up across the table. Another notification appeared. Then another. A major news network had published a story. A local civil rights attorney had publicly commented on the incident. The attention was growing instead of fading. Monica noticed the screen but made no move toward it. "You do not have to carry this tonight," she said softly. Ava looked at her mother. Then she turned the phone completely off. The porch fell quiet again. Above them, the stars continued appearing one by one. For the first time since the afternoon began, Ava felt herself breathe deeply. Yet somewhere beyond the calm of that peaceful evening, forces she could not yet see were already beginning to move. The next morning, sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of City Hall as reporters crowded into a press briefing room that was far fuller than usual. What had begun as a local incident was no longer local. Overnight, millions of people had watched the videos. News outlets across the country replayed the footage. Legal analysts debated it. Community leaders discussed it. And somewhere in the middle of all that attention sat a piece of information nobody outside the police department had yet seen. Officer Ryan Mitchell stood near the back of an internal review meeting, staring at a large screen mounted on the wall. The room smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. No one was speaking much. A deputy chief stepped forward and pressed a button. Body camera footage appeared. The recording showed the entire encounter from beginning to end. Every conversation, every document offered, every opportunity to verify the facts sooner. Ryan watched silently. The confidence that had once guided his decisions now felt distant. As the footage continued, uncomfortable details emerged. Ava had remained calm. She had provided documentation immediately. She had answered every question respectfully. The facts had been available almost from the beginning. The room remained quiet except for the sound of the recording. Several officials exchanged uneasy glances. Then came another revelation. Dispatch logs, timestamps, verification records. A complete timeline appeared on the screen. It showed exactly when ownership information became available and how long it took to influence decisions. The deputy chief folded his arms. No anger, no accusations, just facts. Sometimes facts were more powerful than either. Across town, Ava sat in a law office overlooking downtown Atlanta. The morning sun reflected off neighboring skyscrapers, filling the conference room with soft light. Attorney Sarah Bennett placed a thick folder on the table. Inside were printed articles, witness statements, video screenshots, and legal notes. Ava looked at the growing stack and felt overwhelmed. Less than 24 hours earlier, she had been running ordinary weekend errands. Now attorneys, journalists, and civic leaders were discussing her experience. Sarah opened the folder. "There is something you should see." She turned several pages and slid a document across the table. It was an internal review notice. Ava read the first few lines slowly. Her eyes widened. The department had launched a formal investigation. Additional footage was being examined. Procedures were being reviewed. Questions were being asked at the highest levels. Monica sat beside her daughter and remained silent. She simply placed a reassuring hand over Ava's. Outside the office windows, the city moved through another normal day. Cars crossed intersections. People hurried to meetings. Construction cranes stood against the bright blue sky. Yet for Ava, nothing felt normal anymore. Later that afternoon, a televised press conference began. Cameras flashed. Reporters filled every seat. The deputy chief stepped to the podium and cleared his throat. Behind him stood city officials, legal advisors, and community representatives. Millions would eventually watch what happened next. And when the first statement was finally read aloud, Officer Ryan Mitchell realized that the story he thought was over had only just begun. A week later, every seat inside the federal courthouse annex was filled. Reporters lined the walls. Cameras waited outside. Legal analysts occupied entire rows, notebooks open, ready to document every development. What had started in a shopping center parking lot had evolved into something much larger. Ava sat beside attorney Sarah Bennett at a polished oak table beneath soft courtroom lighting. Through the tall windows, morning sunlight reflected off the glass towers of downtown Atlanta. The atmosphere felt serious but calm. Across the room, representatives from the city and police department reviewed documents quietly. No one seemed eager to speak before the proceedings began. Sarah slid another folder toward Ava. Inside was the final investigative report. Ava had already read portions of it, but seeing the completed document felt different. The findings were clear. The review concluded that critical ownership information had been available far earlier than originally believed. Assumptions had influenced decisions. Established procedures had not been followed consistently. Training deficiencies had been identified. Recommendations for departmental reform filled several pages. The truth was no longer debated. It was documented. Ava looked down at the report and thought about how much had changed in only a few days. She remembered standing beneath flashing lights while strangers formed opinions before hearing her speak. She remembered the uncertainty, the attention, and the exhaustion. Now those same events were being examined under the bright light of accountability. Later that afternoon, negotiations continued behind closed doors. Hours passed. Coffee cups accumulated. Legal teams moved between conference rooms carrying binders and tablets. Outside, journalists waited patiently beneath the warm Georgia sun. Then, just before sunset, the doors finally opened. Sarah emerged first. Monica stood immediately. One look at Sarah's face told her everything. The discussions were over. A settlement had been reached. The city agreed to pay $5 million. It was one of the largest settlements of its kind in recent memory. Reporters rushed to update their stories. News alerts flashed across phones nationwide. Social media exploded with reactions. Yet Ava's first response surprised everyone. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply sat quietly, absorbing the moment. A few minutes later, cameras gathered for a press conference. Microphones lined the podium. Bright lights illuminated the room. Sarah explained the agreement. City officials acknowledged the findings. Questions filled the air. Then someone asked Ava what she planned to do next. The room became silent. Ava stepped forward slowly. She looked across the crowd of reporters and cameras. For a brief moment, she remembered the parking lot, the whispers, the assumptions, the feeling of standing alone. Then she spoke. "This was never about a car," she said softly. The room remained still. And it was never about money. Several reporters lowered their pens. Others leaned forward. Ava took a breath. It was about being seen as a person before being judged by appearances. The silence that followed felt deeper than any applause. Somewhere in the back of the room, even those who had arrived searching for controversy seemed to understand that something more important had just been said. 1 year later, the spring sun shone brightly across the campus of Georgia State University. Students crossed wide brick pathways carrying backpacks, coffee cups, and plans for the future. The air felt light, hopeful. New banners fluttered gently from polished light poles, moving with the warm breeze. Near the center of campus stood a newly installed bronze plaque beside a row of flowering dogwood trees. Its surface reflected the afternoon sunlight in soft golden tones. The inscription was simple: the Ava Johnson Scholarship Fund. Every year, it would help students whose potential was often overlooked by others. Ava stood several yards away, unnoticed among the crowd. She wore the same kind of clothes she had always preferred: comfortable jeans, simple sneakers, a gray hoodie, nothing expensive, nothing designed to attract attention. Around her, students stopped to read the plaque. Some smiled, some took photographs, others quietly continued walking. Most had no idea the young woman standing nearby was the person whose name appeared on the memorial. Ava watched in silence. The settlement money had changed many things, but it had not changed her. She had funded scholarships, mentorship programs, and educational opportunities for young people who needed someone to believe in them. She never wanted revenge. She wanted impact. Across the courtyard, Monica Johnson approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. The years of struggle that once filled her life seemed far away now, yet the lessons remained. She handed 1 cup to Ava and followed her gaze toward the plaque. Neither spoke immediately. They simply stood together beneath the flowering trees. Students laughed somewhere in the distance. A professor hurried across campus carrying a stack of papers. The ordinary rhythm of life continued around them. Monica smiled softly. "Your father would be proud." Ava looked down for a moment, then back toward the students. "I hope so." The breeze moved through the branches overhead. White petals drifted slowly through the sunlight and settled across the grass. For a long time, neither mother nor daughter said another word. They did not need to. The truth had already spoken for itself. The assumptions were gone. The headlines had faded. The arguments had ended. What remained was something quieter, something stronger, a lesson carried forward into the lives of people they would never meet. Across the campus, a young freshman paused to read the plaque one more time before continuing toward class. He smiled to himself and walked on. Ava watched him disappear into the crowd. Then she took a slow breath. The afternoon sunlight warmed her face. The wind stirred gently through the trees. Beside her, Monica stood quietly. Ahead of them stretched a future filled with possibility. And in that peaceful moment, surrounded by nothing more than sunlight, laughter, and the soft sound of leaves moving overhead, justice no longer felt like a verdict. It felt like growth.